You're live.
A little bit of issue hearing people. I want to first make sure that sound's on before I launch into a giant 1 minute discussion on something and find out no one can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, all right.
Loud and clear.
All right, everyone, welcome to Yes. Someone's out there. Yeah, Zorba. Awesome. Hey, thanks for sticking around, Lehman. Welcome to reintroducing Space 1889. This is, as you all know, this is not a new game. It came out more than 30 years ago in the first place, but we're doing a new version. We're calling it Space 1889 Empyrean. I'll talk a little bit about why as we go. But before we get into the nitty gritty of all of that, I want to introduce the awesome, amazing people that are here with me. We'll go ahead and start with Tim, like the grand poobah of Space 1889.
That's right. In some ways, that's right. I was there when it happened. I contributed to all the best parts of that game. Don't ask Frank, but yeah, I contributed.
I mean, so and as a side note, I've been working with Tim for 5 years, and Space 1889 and Sky Galleons of Mars were like my favorite games of all time and setting. I knew like Frank Chadwick, absolutely. I had no idea that Tim had been so involved in it. And we're talking about it, and he says that, and I'm like, what? I go look at my books, and there he is, like right top name on all of it.
I was junior, but I was there. Can I say? No, those were great times. I'd be glad to chat with people about that. We'll talk a little bit about the history of where it all came from and how it got to where it is. But yeah, the new stuff all depends on bright young minds like Darrell and Rachel. Let's introduce.
Speaking of bright young minds, I'll let Rachel introduce herself.
Yeah, so I'm very much the new person on this project, but very excited to be here. I've worked on a bunch of other games, Dystopia Rising Evolution. I've worked on Exalted, Torg Eternity, and I've done a bunch of editing for community content portals like Dungeons Masters Guild. I also GM professionally, both online and in person at our local game shop. So I have a ton of perspective that I'm hoping to bring to the game from, actually sitting at a table with players and, drawing on that. And I've also worked with Roll20 and now work with Hero Forge doing mini stuff. So I'm hoping to kind of bring all of that together and work with this really cool world that we have already established to try and bring it into a new vision for this game. So I'm very excited to be here.
And to me, Space 1889, at its heart, miniatures. We've got this cool machine in Germany, the Siocast. We're going to use it. We're going to use it a lot.
Yes, we will. We'll burn that out and buy another one.
Right? I'm Darrell Hayhurst. I've been with Ulysses for 5 years now. You've mostly seen me working on Torg stuff. And a while ago, Tim approached me because they're like, wow, you've been working on Torg for a while. You are probably about ready to burn out. And I'm like, yes, I am. But you knew best, right?
Yeah.
But the question was like, what else would I do, right? Because I got into Torg because I loved it. Like that was a big draw, and I was like, what could possibly lure me away? And we're actually like in a car in Vegas, and Tim's like, oh, well, here's some of the things that we're working on acquiring, and he lists them off, and he's like, and then the Space 1889, and I was like, oh, okay, like that's it, stop, like yes, that if anything could lure me away from Torg, that is it.
Glad you were enthusiastically on board.
Right. And this was before I knew it was one of Tim's babies, right? I'm like, oh, and then I learned that, and it's like, oh, okay. We're on the same wavelength there.
Well, just to touch on that historical aspect, because I started at Game Designers Workshop in a very, very junior capacity, even in the late 1970s, and by the 80s, I was starting to do some game product. And annoyingly wormed my way into product development, and was doing a lot of work on Traveler, and then Twilight 2000, and then I got to be a principal designer on 2300 AD, which was a lot of fun as well. But then with all of that going on, and there was a lot of great stuff going on at Game Designers Workshop back in those days, Frank started really toying around with the initial concepts for what would become Space 1889. And he would just kind of touch on it. And I remember he'd go around the office and mention this and mention that, how he wants to, just the Jules Verne aspect of what he was trying to create. And everybody, basically to a person who was on the editorial staff somewhere, would secretly go to Frank and say, "Boy, if that's available, I'd sure like to work on that." And that's why a lot of people have their fingers in it on a small level, because not everybody could abandon all the other projects and just go work on Space 1889. But it was a ton of fun, and we had a lot of fun starting out, mainly working on the board games like Sky Galleons of Mars, and that sort of created a lot of the core elements that later went on to become the rest of Space 1889. So, and I know, Darrell, you were a big fan of that game back in the day. I don't know if you want to bring people up to speed on that one.
I am a huge fan of Sky Galleons of Mars, and a lot of what we're tackling rules-wise for this new version is actually more based on Sky Galleons than it is on the role-playing game that grew out of it. It's not one-to-one, but a lot of the elements, the feel that we're going for is trying to capture that. And one of my design goals when we went through this was, and why we didn't just use another system that currently exists, was we want to be able to role play like you would in a Space 1889 game, but we also want to be able to zoom out and be able to do skirmishes like you would do in Soldier's Companion, which had a similar, an adjacent rule set, but a little bit different. And even inside Space 1889, the original, there were a lot of different kind of modular components, some of which worked together very well, some of which were a little bit different, right? So trying to unify.
I'm going to jump in for a minute. It seems like we have a couple people in the chat who are mentioning that they know basically nothing about Space 1889, and they're just here to hear stuff.
Awesome.
What would you guys give them
That's
as
great.
the quick introduction to Space 1889?
So the original pitch was everything Jules Verne should have written but didn't. Everything H.G. Wells could have written. But yeah, really, it is the notion is in the original, it is the year 1889, and Thomas Edison has built a engine that can travel through space. He goes up in a balloon, he turns the thing on, they rocket to Mars. He and a British mercenary, essentially. Turns out Mars isn't, dead and void of oxygen. It's can sustain life, and it's got life there. And it's, the 18th century, so they're like, awesome, let's conquer it. And the British follow with guns and everything else. And it turns out every planet, at least in the inner worlds, has a population and treasures, and there are plenty of people that want all that, and hilarity ensues.
So I would give it perhaps the very short encapsulation of like steampunk goes to space.
Yeah, and this was the godfather of steampunk, right? Yeah. Like Tim, this is the historical perspective, Tim. Like
this was steampunk before anybody was calling it steampunk. So let's Yeah, so we were there before it was cool.
Right. And before they tacked on the stupid punk at the end, because really there's not much punky about the setting. Like
this is thirsty Martians and everything going on Venus, and Selenites on the moon, and everything they sort of imagined was correct about the physical universe in the 19th century turns out to be true. So you cross the luminiferous ether to get where you're going, and you have to deal with all of that. So, and liftwood and things like that actually work, so you can float and have sky galleons and things like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the fun things, like in our design Bible, like we've got this huge list of here's stuff that they thought could still work, in the 1890s.
Right.
And like, we'll check it off, and really the checks off as it does work if it provides opportunity for cool adventures. If it limits opportunities for cool adventures, no, that's not, yeah, we're out of here, right? But there were still people that believed in Hollow Earth. Even Nikola Tesla through the 30s was a strong proponent of superluminous ether. It was the only way to describe certain principles that he thought. So these are not like magical things. Like, no, they really thought some of this stuff could work. And we built upon that, and then one of the other fun things that we've done with the technology is said, because we have these new elements like Martian liftwood and some of these other things, it stops at steam. Like, we don't go into diesel. Like, there won't be internal combustion engines. It's like, no, we're hyper developing steam. Anything beyond that moves into a different genre, which is not our bread and butter.
Right.
Yeah, which has led to, I think, a joke Tim made during the development that has made me laugh the hardest ever since. As we were talking about, in Venus, it's all like swamp and lizard men and tar and oil, and because we don't do diesel and anything like that, they think it's just junk. Like, what are we going to do with this crap? Like, they won the anti-lottery on that planet. Like, yeah.
So yeah, this is 19th century colonialism and exploration throughout the inner solar system on all these exotic, strange worlds with all these different races and life forms, and yeah, it's a ton of fun. And I know Darrell's been doing a lot to extend the history, and we're going to start a little later than 1889 with the new setting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I picked the year 1899 because one of the, it's still called Space 1889, everyone. It always will be, like, no matter where we go in the timeline. But even in the novels, they had a novel line called Space 1889 and Beyond. And the original work in progress name for the line was going to be Space 1889 Beyond, so we could move forward. But it was a little too close to the novel line, and I didn't want people to get confused by them. I'm going to sidebar and say, I get, for new fans, love you, welcome. For old fans, one of the biggest questions that we often get is what's going to be in continuity or not, and the answer is yes. So, like, I'm pulling from the novels, I'm pulling mostly from the GDW original, but we're not pretending that the Clockworks version didn't happen. And when there are inconsistencies between those two, I haven't decided if this is going to be a design joke or for real. But one of the gags in H.G. Wells' Time Traveler is the time traveler changes history, and there's these weird things that shift and change because of him. And so if there's differences between the two versions, they're like, oh, that's the time traveler. Like, he made his trip, and that's why it's different. I don't know if we'll ever mention that in the text or anything like that, but to me, that's the excuse for why, say, the Paris Commune succeeds in one version and fails in another. When we pick, between the two, it's like, and if it was in your game and it's suddenly not, it's like, it's that damn time traveler, that guy.
Well, of course, what Darrell's touching on here is, of course, there's a rich history to the game that's been developed a lot over the years. We're trying to pull that all together into one cohesive setting that people can play in now. But so much revolves around the fact that you've got all of these, especially European nations, but the other nations of Earth that now have the ability to go to Mars and to Venus, and they have interests there. So that all plays into everything that's going on. In fact, the different national characters are a big part of how you establish exactly what you're going to be doing,
and the different Martian characteristics.
So I'm gonna jump back in for a minute because I'm seeing that we have a couple more questions on the Twitch chat. about how the two questions are: how do we plan to deal with racism without offending people but still keeping to the genre? And then following that, are the colonizers the protagonists here? So I'm just going to kind of jump in on that a little bit.
It's part of why I hired Rachel, everyone.
Yeah, that's part of why I'm here. As far as the first question about dealing with racism, we are looking at how it's presented in the game material, and we are definitely like looking at how we can address that so that we make it, more comfortable to modern sensibilities, that we deal with, some of the issues that obviously were in existence in 1889 in real life, in such a way that we are not minimizing those issues, but that we are still, staying true to the original game material. So that's kind of an ongoing discussion that we are having right now to try and figure out how best to address that. But it is something that we are definitely aware of, and that Darrell and I have gone back and forth on quite a bit so far. As far as whether the colonists are protagonists, so the original version of the game was very human-centric, and humans go out and colonize all of these other planets. And one of the things that we are really doing in this version of the game is we're putting more emphasis on some of the other, the alien species and their cultures, and trying to make them equal parts of the game world.
Yeah.
So that it's not exclusively like humans go colonize and they are the heroes. It is humans go colonize, and sometimes that's a problem. That's something that we're going to be playing with and building on as we continue to work on developing this game.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I found fascinating about the original was, at least in the core book, it hits that head on, right? It says, hey, look, this is based on the attitudes of the time. Here's what those attitudes are. And also, we're not saying they're right. Like, now, in the actual adventures, the core book says play on either side. The actual adventures generally tended to be like, okay, you're on a mission for the crown, so that kind of went away a little bit, and that's part of where the Empyrean comes from. So people have asked, why is it called Space 1889 Empyrean? The Empyrean, the heavenly veil, right? There, in previous versions, there were a couple of societies, clubs, that had various different members. There was the Explorers Society. There was a Travelers Society. There were a couple of them, right? And we've said that they've kind of all amalgamated into something called the Empyrean Society. And they'll let anyone in as long as they've been to space. So you might have an elitist Londoner, or you might have an evil German, or you might, that's for our German fans out there, you're welcome. Or you might have a lizard man from Venus, or you might have a Martian expatriate. All of these different options, they've all got a reason to be there. And our adventure support, at least initially, is going to be based around that club. And the missions that you go on are going to be very neutral politically, because they've got all this various different membership. And where we get to have a lot of fun with that is, like, the mission can very much be like, oh, a member of the club has gone missing. We watch each other's backs. Please go find them. And that mission takes you into the Coppertese Valley, where the Belgian colonial forces are cutting off Martian hands or something like that. And the great part is you could have a Belgian in the party, and they never had to face this before. But now in the adventure, you're going to be there, and we're not going to take sides, right? Like, I mean, I know which side I would take, but the adventure can't afford to. It's like, well, it's a party of 5 Belgians. Like, okay, that's probably not going to go the way I thought it would. But that choice gets put in front of you, and those dilemmas, I think, are the most interesting part of the setting. Like, well, what do you do when faced with this? Especially because one of my playtesters is playing a Belgian, and she has no idea not a history buff.
Ah,
She is in for a
right.
huge surprise. I can't wait,
And to
But
follow up on some of the commentary again, we do in our very preliminary Earth overview include non-European background a little bit as well.
Oh yeah.
So we are definitely a little bit broader than just the European superpowers. So
yeah, and I'll go into more specifics there than I might have otherwise, because whatever, you guys have been waiting for a while. One of the sections in character creation is something we're calling origins, and because the highest entry barrier that I have found when pulling people into the game is, well, I get Sherlock Holmes and I get an inventor, Thomas Edison or Tesla. Like, I understand that. Oh, and I get a British Lancer. Like, I could do those three things. And the majority of the old games kind of based around those archetypes because that's all most people knew to play. And even though there's a million other things in those books, like the support's there. But what I wanted to do was try and draw that up and make sure people had these options to be like, hey, look, you know, everyone loves the Wakandans, right? Well, the Dahomey Amazons were a real freelance fighting force. Their kingdom had been basically destroyed a couple years before. They're now essentially mercenaries. They exist. This is an option, everyone. Like, this is real world. We're going to gamify it. Like, they're going to be probably even tougher than they were in the real world. But just so you know, that option's right there in front, and we have the same problems with the Martians where Mars is so big, you don't know where to start. So we tried to boil it down like, look, here's a couple, like, fewer than 20 cities, and here's what the personality traits that those cities tend to bring out in people. So, like, oh, you're from that city, he's a little bit of a libertine, or you're from that one, you're basically Martian fascists. Like, you get along with some humans just fine, and but it puts that forward so that people have those options at their fingertips when they're playing. And so we see a much greater variety of characters right out of the gate than we did without it.
and one of the things that we have also been looking at is kind of a like careers into this a bit. Is cool for me to
Oh
jump
yeah,
into?
do it. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
My
So
my
yeah,
my policy is always, if people show up to these things, oh, they get to hear the good juicy stuff.
awesome. So what we have in place right now for character creation, we really wanted to give some modularity, and we wanted to give you guys tools to build characters that are not just those very traditional stereotypes of the steampunk genre, basically. Um, so
Although they're
we
covered too.
yeah. So we have those are all in there. You can play, Sherlock Holmes if you want to. That is absolutely covered. And we have a section where you can go through and you can just modularly build your character from scratch and, choose all of your options and do whatever you want. But then we also added a careers section, which gives a bunch of options that are basically kind of like quick start character builds of, things that you might encounter in these worlds, not just on Earth. Some of them are going to be more applicable to the other planets. Um, but the really cool thing about that is that, especially if you are playing with new people, if you are new to the game or whatever, it's very easy to page through and say, oh, that's a really cool concept that I want to take and run with. And you can either pull it, fully built from the careers section, or you could look at the career section and say, okay, I'm going to use this as my guidelines, and then I'm going to go back into the more modular character design and decide that I want to change the skills up a little bit and refocus on something else. So there is a ton of modularity in the character design that is really going to add to the ability to build a character that really sounds fun for you and that really fits well and makes each group very dynamic and unique. So that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to continuing to work on this.
Yeah, and it puts guys like the Martian Revolver Knights right in front of you,
Absolutely.
rather
Yeah.
than having to like delve through the source book and find it. It's like, oh, that's an option. Revolver Knights sound awesome. Like, why
Yeah.
would
So on a first read through, you can take a look at it and be like, oh, that is, that is part of this, game worlds at this point. But and have those quick references without needing to delve into all of the deep lore of the older version of the game in order to know what would fit well with the game.
Yeah, and I'm going to segue back on that. So part of why part of why we moved it to 1899. There's a couple of reasons, but one was for new players because there is 30 years of lore built into this thing, and it's cool, right? Like it's why I love the game. It's why a lot of people love the game. So we don't want to get rid of it, but that also poses an entry barrier. Like, why? How would I know all of these things? So by moving the timeline forward, we get to all sort of re-explore these planets together because things have changed in the past 10 years, and some of them we've been out of communication between Earth and Mars and all that. So we don't know necessarily what we're getting back into. And so that allows, if you're a longtime fan or you've got the old materials, which when we kickstarted, of course, we're going to have the PDFs available and all that, if you haven't already gotten them on bundle of holding or something like that. And that they're all will have been true 10 years ago. It makes a great basis for making your own adventures and moving it forward. However, there's no guarantee that that's exactly what you'll find when you get there today. And so we get to kind of all find that out together.
And that time skip also really gives us the potential to make Space 1889 Empyrean its own creation, and not just it's not just going to be a repeat of the original game. We are going to take the original game and do everything we can to build on it and make it cool and better and fun for both people who are coming back to it and for new players who are coming to it for the first time.
And if everybody hates it, it'll be easy to ignore. I'm causing Tim pain. You're welcome, Tim.
Oh, that's my life. It's all right. So,
but okay,
you can just expand for me. I mean, the original game basically was human centric. You could only play humans. What are all the character choices now?
Yeah, so and this was one of the things that we wanted to kind of blow the doors open on right out of the gate. And again, with the original system in even every other, with the exception of Savage Worlds version of the system, it was very much human centric, right? Like it's just easier to build characters for that. Now we've got 8 different species that you can start with. I'll even tell you some of the specifics about them. Awesome. Before I do, PK Levine, Space Games called Space 1889 takes place in 1899. The game line is Space 1889. This is the Space 1889 universe. We're going to be jumping around a little bit inside that timeline. So first option, most of these, all I think except for one, existed in the old game, but most of them were not playable. Right. And we were like, well, let's make them playable. They're cool. So the first one is the Automatons. So back in the original, there were both on Mars, there are ancient robots that would work, the clockwork men, and also mad inventors on Earth that could make these things. And they would sometimes appear as NPCs and even in some versions, limited characters. But we really wanted to lean into that and say, no, this is a thing you can do. You can play mechanical people. The things they bring to the table is they're armored. They are mechanical, which means things like poison and lack of oxygen, which come up a lot, are not going to do anything to them. They are tireless. As machines, either you wind them up or you plug them into the steam batteries to charge them up, but they don't eat. They're not taking your supplies and things like that. there's a limitation to them. They're uncanny because these are not human-like droids. This is steampunk, right? This is the Tin Woodsman at best. So socially, they're very limited creatures. And then every species has got what's called a power action. And I'm not going to go too deep into what this means, but essentially, the worse your initiative is, you start getting options that come online called your power options. So the slower you go, the more powerful your potential activity is. Their power action is the reboot, the system redirect. Backups come online, so it could be down, and then if they get that low initiative, they might revive like the Terminator and come back online and save the day.
And one of the really cool things about the automatons from a role play perspective is that it really kind of opens the question of what does it mean to be a person, and when does one become an autonomous person versus a machine. So that really allows for a lot of role play potential that I think is going to be a lot of fun for people to play with as they delve into this game.
Yeah. Second species are the Selenites. Oh, go ahead.
No.
Formerly known as the Selenites, but the reason that we call them something other than Selenites is they exist in more places than just the moon. Like in the novels and other things, they've been found on other moons. They've been found in asteroid fragments, and there were different subspecies of them. So we're like, okay, let's take a step back. They're from one stock. Like, here is what that stock is. And they were in the very first book, in the very first adventure in that book. You meet them. And so they're iconic in a way. But they were also kind of never playable because they're just giant ants. And only a small, like 1 in 100 gets, sort of bred with the ability to communicate at all. And even they're mentally a little weird. They're mostly hive mind, and they're built to be able to remember things and communicate. All the rest of them, they just work in the mines, right? Like that's what they do. So because the keepers of memory are created purposefully, by being fed certain nutrients when needed, we decided no, the Selenites have another need. And so new nutrients have been fed, and there's a new type called the envoy. And the envoy is functionally sapient and can then be played. Quick question: are there ancient relics of former spacefaring civilizations? Absolutely yes. That's so much of the game. That's like a bedrock principle of it. And in fact, these Selenites are one of those artifacts.
Right.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of potential for what you can find out there that is an old mystery that you can delve into and try and learn more about what happened before 1889, before humans figured out space travel, and what these ancient civilizations were. So there's definitely that deeper draw of there's something bigger that was here before.
Yeah, and some of the previous games have delved into that directly, and again, it's all canon, everybody. For example, Red Sands, the Savage Worlds adventure that came from it. And this is going to be one of those funny things where history switches back and forth. Sometimes these precursors are called the Vulcans. Sometimes they are called the Phaetons. I always used Vulcan for basically 20 years. However, upon looking up the theory, again, like here's what they thought back in the 1890s. They thought that the asteroid field used to be a planet called Phaeton. So Phaeton's actually better than Vulcans. So it's the Phaetons. Vulcan is a small planet inside Mercury's orbit around the sun. It will be there too, if you know where to look. So Selenites have an exoskeleton. They've got crazy faceted ant eyes. They've got big pincers. Like the robots, they are tireless. They are also uncanny like the robots because poor guys, even an envoy built to speak has a tough time with it. And their power action is called a seize, where they've essentially got 4 arms. 2 of them are useful for manipulating machines. The other 2 are just their big pinchers, and on that power action, they can just grab someone with those other 2 and hold them. So, third race, species, they're not races, they're species. Third species is the Drobates. And they, in the old one, were called the Moon Men. But again, they're on more than the moon. They're definitely more than just men. And in the novels, they go into them a little bit more. And that's where we find out their name for themselves is the Drobates. And as far as they're concerned, they are that alien, that ancient precursor race, the Phaetons. Spoiler alert, everyone, they are not. they they can think that all they want, but they just aren't. Will the real quick? Will the rules be compatible with other Ulysses games like Torque? No. There's a very specific reason for that. I talked a little bit about the scalability and all that early on, but really, and this is my design philosophy is the system needs to match the story that you're telling. Torg's system is perfect for cinematic, reality altering, strangeness and all that. This, we're trying to tell a different kind of story. Like, these are based more on the Edisonades. These are based more on Verne's travelogues. These are based more on H.G. Wells' style of adventure. So the system has to match that. And it's got to be specific to these kinds of species and to the space travel and to the vehicles and the steam and the invention and all that. So it's its own thing. Yeah.
I would say that, having also worked on some stuff for Torg, one of the big differences is that Space 1889 is very focused on exploration and what we don't know and the stories that we're going to tell to learn about the unknown. Whereas Torg is very much a little bit grittier, a little bit, we're here to fight the good fight, and is much more focused on that conflict. So Torg is a great game focused on conflict, and this is a great game that is focused on a lot of dynamics about what it means to be an explorer, what it means to be a person within these societies, and what we don't know that we may find out for better or worse as we delve into these worlds.
Also, I want to fight sky galleons against each other.
Right.
Also that. Yeah.
Isn't that the whole point?
Right? So the Drobates, they've got low light vision. They're small. They're kind of short little guys. They're telepathic. And this was one that I was actually like iffy on at first, but I went back to read late 19th century literature, and telepathy did appear as a theme in multiple novels. So telepathy's in. Like, okay. And it also was a major plot element in the Space 1889 books. And also, it's a key component of working that ancient technology. So that's one of the things that Drobates are, these ugly, nasty little runts, but they've got telepathy, which means they can use the old stuff really well. Cool. Yep, mesmerism, exactly. Mesmerism is a character option.
Oh,
yeah, telepathy is not only an option for Drobates. We get to play with it with other things as well. So that's one of the really cool character build options that you may get to play around with.
Yeah, and this is more like old school telepathy, so you can't read minds with it, but you can communicate with other people who happen to have telepathy and use Phaeton technology. A Drobate's power action is undermine, where they get to manipulate people. They're just clever and manipulative and nasty. Yeah. Humans. I think everybody has a pretty good idea on what a human is. The two properties they come with are resilience and vitality. And one of the things about the setting has always been humanity's on the rise, right? Like, we are explosively inventive, conquest-minded, in some ways. The joke I like to make is we do great things terrible things, but great. And that vitality is part of that. Like, we're the inventors. No one else, even the ancient Martians, have that spark that we do. We've got that drive, and that expresses as a game mechanic. The Kragans, High Martians. They don't call themselves High Martians. They call themselves Kragans, and that comes from the old term, the crag, where the fortresses that they would live in. And yeah, they've got low light vision, grasping feet because they grab things with their feet. They can fly. They've got these wing flaps, and they've got a lift gland that, like liftwood, can bring them up. Their power action is they can drop people. So they'll grab someone, lift them up into the air, and then let them go. And falling damage in this is really bad news.
As it should be.
Right? And I'm sure that's going to interact really interestingly with basically airship combat. If we have people playing Kragans who are also fighting between ships, so there's going to be a lot of some fun interaction there. And there's also some really cool kind of like cultural stuff with the Kragans.
Yes, yeah, they're interesting guys. They've been around for a long time, and they're pretty rough. And in most versions, they were just considered too evil to play. Red Sands let you play them, so we're not the first to open the door to them, but they're for sure here. We've got the Automatons, which are Martians. Because one of the things that was funny to me is we refer to them as Martians, and they're like, okay, like, we don't have a name for ourselves, fine, good enough. And so our kind of internal gag is like the co-line word for people is Motten, which is, they're like, yeah, close enough. Martian, Motten, same thing. They're drought resistant because they've been living on a dry world for so long. They're versatile. So a lot of the gags that humans get in like Dungeons and Dragons and other systems, that's the Martians in this one. They've been around for so long. They've hit the heights of their civilization, and then they've kind of collapsed almost back down to where they're almost back at a level with us who are just now coming up. But what that's given them is this flexibility, both in terms of their ethics and in terms of their character builds.
And we also, as we said, we did a decent amount of world building. We have, quite a few cities laid out on Mars that the Automatons are, dwelling in, and they're all very different. So there is a lot of potential already established for people who are new to the game to play these characters in ways that are very unique.
Yeah. And those are all the city-states as they were described in the old book. Just made easier, made more accessible. Like,
yeah, so there's a lot of potential for, modularity in that it's not just like, this is the species I'm playing, and therefore this is the cookie cutter of how they should act. There's a lot of potential to draw on all.
So this next species is one of the only new ones, and it's only sort of new. These are the ogres, right? And they're Mr. Hyde. And this is actually something that would occur in the old game all the time. Some inventor would come up with a formula, and you take it, and they get strong or bestial, or we'll go ahead and surgically implant parts, like in some of H.G. Wells's work, and all that. It's a trope that reoccurred not only in the fiction, but also in the games themselves. So we said, well, it's been 10 years. This is probably stabilized enough to the point where there are people that survived those initial transformations, and now they're a thing. Frank asks, what planets and moons are colonized? Mars, the moon, although the moon's a little wacky, Venus, and there are outposts on Mercury. And of course,
and obviously Earth is in the mix as well.
Right. So that was one of the other reasons for picking 1899 for our move forward point 2, is the year that essentially the United States of America becomes a colonial power, whether we wanted to or not. We kind of overnight went from to as we inherit all of Spain's assets, and of course Spain's going to have assets on other planets too, and we're kind of thrust into that greater world overnight. So where before we were very British centric, talking about colonialism, now we've got new players in the game, the Americans, which for a lot of our American audience, I think will hit a little closer to home.
And one of the other really cool things is that because we do have the, all of the Earth civilizations to play with, there's also the potential that you could have a party that is all alien species coming to Earth to do things and interacting from that very different perspective. Yep. So that's one of the things that I as a GM and a storyteller am very excited that is we have enough background on the Earth version of 1899 that those could be some really interesting stories as well.
Yeah, and so Frank asks, so there's still much to explore. Yes, the whole point of this is even a world with colonies on it like Mars is still very much unexplored by Earthling and even other Martians because the city-states are very isolated from one another. So the whole point of the game is to go see what's there. One of the things we didn't want to happen was like, oh, there's all these books that have been written about Mars. We're just tourists now. Like it's all been seen. It's like, no. Wipe the slate. What's there now?
Yeah, part of the allure of this, basically this entire game world, is what you don't know that you might find out. And we have some cool character mechanics in there to try and encourage that and to really build those into player stories as people delve into the game.
Yeah, and also we've been teasing what's beyond the asteroid belt for 30 years. We're going to get there. Assuming the Kickstarter does well. We'll get there. And then the last species are the Skreelan, the Venusians. They're the lizardmen from Venus. Again, Red Sands let you play them. Everything else kind of looked at them a little bit side-eye because they're kind of tough in some ways. But I think they'll fit in really well and provide some interesting options for people.
That's all pretty exciting. From a game where you could really just play the humans before, this is a great way to open it up. I think it's terrific.
Yeah. And yeah, we have, Rachel was talking about the careers. There's 60 of them in the core.
There's a whole lot, yeah.
we might end up cutting that down a little bit, but we'll see.
Yeah, we've gone back and forth. Darrell had a whole bunch to begin with. I went through and made some suggestions, and we'll see where that all lands. And yeah, so can I talk about agendas a little bit?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So as I was saying, one of the really cool things that is involved in the character building is that we're really encouraging players to design characters that are going to have their own goals and their own stories, so that, again, it's not just going to be the flat, Thomas Edison goes out into the world to see what he can do. And so part of that is that we are encouraging during character building that each player set up an agenda for their character. They have some kind of a motivation as far as why they're part of the Empyrean Society and what they are hoping to achieve personally as they are going out to these different worlds to learn things and all of that. And that's going to be a very interactive thing between the characters and the players and our referee, our storyteller. And it's also going to give some goals that will help a single character in the party, but also create really good stories for everybody else who is then along for the ride. So we have it set up so that there are some samples that you can draw from really easily if this is your first time playing with a dynamic like this. And then we also kind of just opened the gates to, if you find something that works for you and the people you're playing with, have fun, tell some great stories. So I think that that's going to be a really fun thing for people who really enjoy that deeper role play to be able to delve into.
Yeah, because to me, that's the most important question you can ask. What is it that's driving this character to hurl themselves out into the dark ether, in a steam powered, will we start with VTT support from the beginning? We are playtesting on Roll20. We have a very strong relationship with the Foundry.
Right.
That I haven't built anything for that yet, but I think it's almost guaranteed we are going to have VTT out of the gate.
Oh, Jan Wagner will have it no other way.
Yeah, that's the new world, everyone. You can't not have it. I'm just looking as I was actually surprised Robert hasn't tried to kick us out of the room yet.
I mean, we have like 9 more minutes, don't we?
Well, let's talk about some practical matters. Right now, I have in my hot little hand a very coveted item that I'm sure a lot of people would like to see, but you just can't. And it is the alpha version of the game, so that we can do some actual in-depth reading and playtesting and whatnot. Where are you going? So, what are the next steps as we move this towards final publication? And one thing I'd like to know right away is, when are you going to start doing some playtesting that I can get involved in?
Yeah, so right now we're beating the heck out of it. Like, I'm running some games now. As we get those, like, we'll start, like, okay, Rachel's going to start running a couple. I'll bring you in, Tim. We'll expand from there.
Awesome.
Yep, and one of the things that we actually did basically this week was I got the rules set and sent it back to Darrell and was like, I rules lawyered it. I tore it apart. I asked all of the questions, so we're working on polishing that up. Yeah,
right. Cover those alpha rules with bloody red ink. That's what
pretty much. Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
Right. It's what we need. So everyone knows, like, I write crazy stuff. So you're the voice of sanity. You're welcome. Awesome. When can we expect a crowdfunding? So the thing that I say over and over and over is, we will sell no wine before it's time. Right. My original plan before COVID was, we wanted to show off some stuff at Gen Con this year and have books the Gen Con after. And to have books at the Gen Con after means we would have to be doing a crowdfunding, which is almost certainly going to be Kickstarter to start with, early in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Now, COVID's pushed some things around a little bit. We're still on pretty good track writing wise, but like, as we're all going to acknowledge, art's super important, right? Like, when the original game came out, it had an aesthetic like nothing else, and we want to make sure that not only are we being true to that, but we're pushing it forward into that, like, that next level, and that we want it to be the coolest looking game we've ever done, right? We'll see how long it takes to do that. If we can hit those milestones, that's what I'm aiming for, everyone. But and people are joking about credit card stuff. This is not gonna be quite like Torg, where, for one, boxes are super expensive now, so we don't really want to do boxes as much. And also, we want to be, oh my god, oh, that's a cat outside my window. What is that sound? Oh, that's me. We also want to be conscientious of what we're asking from people, right? So expect absolutely a core book. Expect absolutely extras if we unlock goals and things like that. I've got some of the coolest stuff in the world planned if we make it. But some of that is going to be, a question of production timetables and schedules.
Of course.
But yeah, we are very excited to potentially make cool stuff, and those stretches, we'll see if we get there.
like I almost want to spoil a couple of the things that I want to do, just so people like demand them later on and we have to do them. Oh, Tim's not stopping. Okay.
It's your soapbox, pal.
Okay, so here's two of the things that I want to do desperately, like as add-ons that would come in on this box. One of the few mechanical differences between this one and any other versions is we introduce a D20 for one very specific mechanism. It's called the danger die. And basically, when you got to roll on a table for random results, rather than using D6s and multiples and things like that, we roll a D20. And the reason I love that is twofold. One, whenever that D20 gets rolled, like, oh man, we're in trouble, right? Like this is someone getting injured, or how bad is a random encounter or a critical hit or whatever. So it is the dangerous danger die. What I want to do is a giant D20 that is painted like Mars with the canals and the cities and the stuff like that. A Mars looking giant danger die. Everyone except nothing less than that.
I love it.
And then the other one I want to do is we've got the same material that we make the Torg tokens out of. You can do other shapes than tokens, and you can print on them and all that. And one of the things that I desperately want to do is sky galleons printed on that material that you can then assemble and into like a 3D aphid or a blood runner or things like that. So when you're flying around, you've got that, or if you get into a skirmish aboard it, like you could have it. And if you just want to play giant sky galleons of Mars with it, you could. Oh, I want that so bad. So those are some of the things I'll be pushing.
So we'll evaluate all the possible toy value. There's a lot of miniatures and fun stuff like that too.
Miniatures for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see how we can paint a big Martian D20. That's going to be
That's a tough one. I know that's a big ask, but I want it
right
so
there.
bad.
We'll see if we can make that happen.
But I personally would love a giant Mars D20. So for all of you who are out there talking about our Kickstarter, you should definitely keep an eye out.
We wants it. Oh, we wants
yes.
it. But the rest of the game uses D6s, everyone. So you're not going to need new dice to play it, for sure.
Very true to its roots.
Yeah, don't forget the object and STL files. So I will not promise that. This is something that we're talking about internally a lot, because the cool thing is we're going to need those files for the Silecast machine no matter what we do. The big question will be, I think we will, personally. I'll ask for that, because to me it's just like a PDF. Like you sell a digital version and let people do their own thing. That's a case we've got to make for the business, and that'll be one of those things when we do the Kickstarter. It could even be an unlock. So that could take care of it that way.
Absolutely.
All right, wow, we're 58 minutes into a 50-minute panel. No one's kicking us out, I guess.
They told us we can have till the end of the hour.
Well, all right.
So if anybody has any last-minute questions, this is your moment, I suppose.
Yeah, last questions and last words. Tim, do you have any words of wisdom for the audience at home?
Obviously, I'm thrilled to be involved again with Space 1889 on any level, and it's near and dear to my heart. I'm glad it's getting a rebirth. I'm glad it's getting a more organized push, and we're going to introduce that to a whole lot of new fans, I think, and really build on what I think was originally a terrific concept. I think it did lead to a lot of what later became cyberpunk, steampunk.
Steampunk,
And as such, it just deserves a new approach and a new look, and we're going to give it all of that. It's a lot of fun, and I have great confidence in both of you, Darrell and Rachel, to make that happen.
Rachel, last words?
I'm very excited to be working on this. This is obviously this is a game that has a history, has a very developed, lore and everything. And I'm very excited to be part of bringing this into a more modern era of gaming, because the way we play games have, obviously developed over the past 30 years. What we look for in tabletop games has developed over the past 30 years. So I'm really excited to be able to draw on all of that background and all of that wonderful world building that is already there, and basically represent it in a way that will be fun for people who are familiar with it already, and also really accessible to a whole new group of gamers who haven't heard of or haven't played Space 1889. So I'm very excited to be a part of this, and I'm really looking forward to a lot of the stories that are going to be able to be told with what we have on board right now.
I'm looking forward to being true to what made the original awesome while pushing it into newly discovered worlds, new things. And one of those things that it's something that I'm super weak on, but I know Rachel's got a little bit more background on, which is again one of the reasons why she was such a great find for us. LARP. It's not my thing, but I think it is form made for a setting like Space 1889, and it's something that we want to engage with more strongly than we ever did before.
Absolutely.
I think that's our final words, everyone. Now we all get to sit here uncomfortably for a couple of minutes as we wonder what happened.
We super appreciate you guys all joining us tonight. So glad you could stop by.
Hopefully we spoiled some things and whetted some appetites.
We hope that you are starting to get as excited about this game as we are.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rachel, Tim, and Darrell. And tomorrow, we've still got some more games going on for the weekend. You can still go to startplaying.games/Ulysses to get into some games that you can play. If you just want to watch some games, we've got Rudy Basso presents Torg Eternity, The Tower, actual play tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and at 1 p.m. Grant Ellis presents The Dark Eye. I'm waiting for this to read what it says. The Shadow Looms there at the bottom of the screen there. The Shadow Looms at Golden Hour. There you go. So check that out tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific. Otherwise, have a good night. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.